We were together 20 years but never married. The day after he died, his family changed the locks and called me his house guest. 3 days after Daniel died, I came back from the registrar's office. I'd been trying to register the death and I couldn't. Because I wasn't a qualified informant, because I wasn't his wife, because I was nothing apparently on paper, and my key didn't work in my own front door. His sister opened it from the inside. She'd had the locks changed. She stood in the doorway of the house I had lived in for 20 years, in the hallway I had painted, and she said, "Francis, I think it's best if you collect your things. We've bagged up what's obviously yours. Daniel would want the family to handle the house now." And behind her I could see black bin bags, my life in black bin bags, and she said gently, as if she were being kind, "You were his house guest for a long time and we're grateful, but you were never his wife. His house guest, 20 years. Let me back up. My name is Francis Acafer. I'm 54 years old and I spent 20 years building a life with a man I never married, and when he died without warning and without a will. His family used the one piece of paper I didn't have, a marriage certificate, to erase the other 20 years of paper that said I'd built everything alongside him. This is the story of how you prove a marriage that legally never happened, and what it costs, and the thing Daniel had actually done that none of them ever thought to look for. Let me tell you about Daniel first, and about why we never married, because the whole trap is built on that question, and I've had to answer it 100 times to people who had no right to ask it. Daniel Riley and I met when I was 33 and he was 36. I was a restaurant manager. He was a joiner who was about to stop being a joiner and start being a man who owned a workshop. We were together within a month and living together within a year, and that was it. That was the decision, made quietly and completely the way the real decisions are. We never married. And I'm going to be honest about why, because it matters, and because the honest answer is not a tidy one. Part of it was Daniel's family. The Rileys were, I'll be careful, they were a certain kind of family, close and loud and slightly closed, and they had never once made me feel like I belonged in it. Not with open hostility, with a sort of permanent provisionality. I was Daniel's girlfriend, and then I was Daniel's partner, and I was welcome at things, and I was never family, and there was a line I could feel that I was never invited across. His mother, while she lived, called me Daniel's friend for 11 years. She knew my name, she chose the word, and so marriage became a strange, frayed thing. Daniel would raise it now and then, and there was always a shadow over it, his mother's disapproval, the sense that a wedding would be a battlefield, the feeling that we'd have to fight his whole family to stand up in a room together. And we were happy. That's the thing people forget to factor in. We were so happy that fighting a war to get a certificate we didn't feel we needed seemed absurd. We used to say, we actually said this to each other, we don't need a piece of paper. I have thought about that sentence every single day since he died. Because here is what nobody tells you, and what I am telling you now, so that if you are living the way we lived, you will hear it from someone who paid for the lesson. The piece of paper is not about love. You were right that we didn't need a piece of paper to love each other. We were catastrophically, life-destroyingly wrong that we didn't need it for everything else. The paper isn't a symbol. A paper is a legal instrument, and when one of you dies, the law does not care how much you loved each other. It cares about the instrument. And if you don't have the instrument, the law will hand your entire life to whoever does have the right paper. And in our case, the right paper was a birth certificate that said Riley, and it belonged to his family. There's a whole myth in this country, I believed it. Everyone I know believed it, called common law marriage. The idea that if you live together long enough, you become as good as married in the eyes of the law. 20 years surely makes you something. It doesn't exist. Common law marriage does not exist. It's a folk belief, and I discovered it was a folk belief in a solicitor's office, 3 days after the locks were changed, at 54 years old, having organized my entire life around it. Now let me tell you what we actually built, because this is the part that made the erasure not just cruel but absurd. We didn't just love each other for 20 years. We built two things together, brick by brick. The first was the house. When we bought it, I was 38, it was a wreck. A repossession, cheap, damp, half derelict, and we bought it because it was all we could afford and because Daniel could see what it could be. And over the next 15 years, we rebuilt it. And when I say we, I mean we. I mean I spent every weekend for 3 years with a paint scraper, and to skip I mean I project managed the extension while Daniel was flat out with the business. I mean I chose the kitchen and dealt with the builders and paid for half of everything out of my own restaurant manager's salary, which was not nothing, which was in fact most of my adult earnings. But the house was in Daniel's name, just Daniel's. And I want you to understand how that happened, because it's the most ordinary thing in the world and it's the thing that nearly destroyed me. When we bought it, Daniel had the deposit. He'd had a small inheritance from his grandfather, and I didn't quite. The mortgage was easier in one name, and the broker said it was simpler, and we were 38 and in love, and we thought we had 40 years to sort out the paperwork. So it went in his name, for now. And for now became 15 years, because you never do it, you never get round to it. Because doing it means sitting in an office contemplating one of you dying, and you are far too busy living. The second thing we built was the business, Riley Joinery. Daniel's name on the door, Daniel's hands on the wood, but I built the company. I want to be precise. In year 2, I left the restaurant, and I ran Riley Joinery's entire operation. The books, the quotes, the invoicing, the payroll for what became 9 employees, the contracts, the VAT, the hiring, the client relationships. For 18 years. I turned a talented joiner with a van into a company with a workshop, 9 staff, and a turnover of about £800,000 a year. Daniel said it constantly to everyone. Francis is the business, I just do the wood. Let me give you one morning, because 18 years is a number and a morning is a life. It's about year 6. It's 5:30 and it's January, and Daniel's already gone to a job the other side of the county. There's been a disaster. A supplier's let us down on a kitchen that's meant to be installed that day, and the client is a nightmare. And Daniel's two lads are standing in our kitchen at 5:30 looking at me, because they always looked at me. Because Daniel did the wood and Francis did everything else. And I got on the phone in my dressing gown, and I found the materials at a second supplier 40 miles away, and I rerouted one of the lads to collect them. I rang the client and talked her down and rebooked the install for the afternoon, and got her to feel like she'd won, and I redid the day's schedule for all 9 of them on the back of an envelope. By 7, I'd saved a £4,000 job and the company's reputation with a client who'd have told everyone. And Daniel rang at lunchtime, and I told him, and he laughed and said, "See, this is why I don't worry about anything. I married the business." And then he caught himself because we weren't married, and he said, "You know what I mean." And I did, and we both let it go, the way we let all of it go for 20 years. I married the business. He said it as a joke, and it was the truest thing about us, and it was also, it turned out, legally worth precisely nothing. Because, you know what I mean is not a document, and the law does not know what he meant. The law only knows what's signed. But the business was in Daniel's name. A sole tradership, then a limited company with Daniel as sole director and sole shareholder because, again, it was simpler because I didn't need to be on it, because we were a unit, and what was the difference? Because we were going to sort it out. We were always going to sort it out. We had all the time in the world. We had no time at all. Daniel died at 57 of a heart attack in the workshop on an ordinary Tuesday. He had not sorted out any of it, and neither had I, and I want every unmarried person who has ever said, "We don't need a piece of paper," to understand exactly what I inherited for that sentence. Nothing. On paper, I inherited nothing. 20 years, a rebuilt house, a company I ran, and on the morning of the Wednesday, legally, I was a woman living in a dead man's house with no right to be there. Let me tell you about the death, and the 72 hours after, because the speed of it is the thing I still can't get my head around. Daniel collapsed on the Tuesday afternoon. One of the lads called me. I got to the hospital before the ambulance did, nearly. He was gone by 6, and I was destroyed. I want to establish that, because it matters for what the family did. I was not thinking about houses or businesses or paper. My person, my whole life, the man I'd woken up next to for 20 years, was dead, suddenly, with no warning, and I was in the kind of grief that removes your ability to stand up straight. And it was in exactly that state, the first 3 days, when I could barely breathe, that Daniel's family moved. His sister, Bernadette, arrived on the Wednesday morning. And Bernadette is important, so let me tell you about her. Bernadette is 2 years older than Daniel and had spent 20 years being cordially, smilingly cold to me, and Bernadette had never worked out. This is the engine of the whole thing. She had never worked out that Daniel had money. That the wreck had become a lovely house worth £600,000. That the man with the van now had a company worth the best part of £1 million. Bernadette turned up on the Wednesday to comfort her dead brother's girlfriend and discovered over about 48 hours that her dead brother's girlfriend was sitting on well over £1 million of assets, all of which, because there was no will and no marriage, passed under the rules of intestacy to Daniel's blood relatives, to her. And something in Bernadette in those 48 hours went very cold and very clear. By Friday, the locks were changed. I need to explain the law here quickly, because it's the load-bearing wall of the whole nightmare and most people don't know it. I certainly didn't. When someone dies without a will, their estate is distributed by the rules of intestacy. And the rules of intestacy recognize spouses, civil partners, and blood relatives. They do not recognize unmarried partners. At all. It does not matter if you live together for 20 years, 50 years, forever. If you are not married or in a civil partnership, and there is no will, you are entitled to precisely nothing under intestacy, and the estate goes to the blood family. In Daniel's case, no children, parents dead, so his siblings. Bernadette and their younger brother Cormac were under the law Daniel's heirs, and I was under the law no one, a house guest. Her word was technically almost accurate, and that's what made it unbearable. So when she changed the locks and bagged up my things, she wasn't, and this is the horror of it, she wasn't obviously doing anything illegal. She was the heir to the house. I was an occupant with no legal title. In her framing, she was simply taking possession of her late brother's property and allowing his former girlfriend to collect her belongings. 20 years, in bin bags, in a hallway I had painted, and the law more or less on her side. I found a solicitor. It took me a week to be able to do even that. I was staying in a Premier Inn, 54 years old, with bin bags in the boot of my car. But I found her a woman called Ewan Coker, who did exactly this. And I sat in her office and told her everything, and Ewan said something that saved my life that week. She said, "Francis, listen to me. It is true that there is no common law marriage, and it is true that under intestacy you inherit nothing. But that is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a different story. Because you have a claim, a strong one, under the Inheritance Provision for Family and Dependents Act. You lived as his spouse for 20 years. You were financially interdependent. That act exists precisely for people in your position, and courts make provision for long-term cohabitants all the time." She was writing fast. "And separately, and this is huge, you have a claim against both the house and the business based on contribution. You paid for half the house. You built the company. If we can show your financial and non-financial contribution, we can establish a beneficial interest that exists regardless of whose name is on the deed. Francis, you are not a house guest. You are a woman with 2 overlapping claims to over £1 million. Bernadette is going to find that out very fast." I cried in that office out of sheer relief. For the first time in a week, I felt like a person with a floor under her. And Ewan said, "Get me the evidence, everything, every payment you made toward that house, every record that shows you ran that business. Bank statements, invoices, emails, anything with your name doing the work. Build me the 20 years on paper, because that's the fight. They'll say you were a house guest, and we'll bury them in evidence that you were a partner. And I went and started building it, and it was there. It was all there. And that's when the family produced the document that stopped me dead. Bernadette's solicitor sent a letter, and attached to it was a tenancy agreement. A tenancy agreement. Between Daniel Riley, landlord, and Frances Acca, tenant, for a room in the house. Dated 11 years earlier. Signed, and it was my signature. It was genuinely my signature by me. And a set of rent payments. A standing order from my accountant Daniels of £400 a month, described on the statements as rent, going back 11 years. I sat in the Premier Inn and looked at a document with my own signature on it that said I was Daniel's tenant, his lauder, paying him rent for 11 years. And I could not, for about 2 days, even remember signing it, which nearly broke me, because it made me doubt my own mind, the way you do, and then I remembered, and remembering was almost worse, because it was real. We had signed it, 11 years earlier. When we tried to get a particular kind of finance for the business, Daniel's accountant had said it would be cleaner for the mortgage and lending picture if the household finances were structured a certain way, and one piece of that was a paper tenancy, a technical meaningless tax and lending arrangement that had made some sense to an accountant in 2013, and that we signed at the kitchen table in about 90 seconds, laughing about it, calling me the lauder, as a joke for about a week afterward. The rent was just me contributing to the mortgage from my own account, relabeled for the accountant's tidy picture. It meant nothing. It was a fiction we'd signed and forgotten inside a month, and now Bernadette's solicitor was holding it up as the truth of my entire life. She wasn't his partner. Look, she was his tenant. She had a tenancy agreement. She paid rent for 11 years in her own signature. This 20-year partnership is a fantasy. The contemporaneous legal document signed by her describes a landlord and a lauder. Ewan's face, when I brought it in, was the worst thing I'd seen since the hospital. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "This is very bad, Frances. Not fatal, but very bad. Because a court weighs contemporaneous documents heavily, and you have signed a contemporaneous document that directly contradicts your case. They will say the tenancy is the real record, and the partnership is the story. And juries, judges, they find a signed agreement very persuasive." She put it down. "I can't tell you this is a straightforward win anymore. I have to be honest with you. This document does real damage. I want to tell you about the weeks after that, because they were the lowest of my life, and I nearly walked away from everything. Because the tenancy agreement didn't just threaten the money. It did something worse, the way these documents always do. It reached back and poisoned the 20 years themselves. I started to wonder in the Premier Inn at 3 a.m. whether I'd been a fool the whole time. Whether the fact that everything was in his name, and I was on paper his tenant, meant something about what I'd actually been to him. The family's story was seeping into me. Maybe you were the house guest. Maybe he never made you a partner on anything because he never quite saw you as one. Maybe 20 years of "we'll sort the paperwork out" was 20 years of him not sorting it out on purpose. That's the thing they do. They don't just take the house. They make you doubt the love, because the love left no paper and the doubt has a document. And Bernadette, sensing it, made an offer, through the solicitors. She would generously, the word was in the letter, allow me to take £20,000 and my personal possessions, in recognition of the length of the friendship, in full and final settlement, if I signed away any claim. £20,000. For 20 years, a rebuilt house, and a company I'd made. And I want to tell you the truth, I nearly took it. Not because I thought it was fair. Because I was 54 and living in a Premier Inn and grieving so hard I couldn't see. The fight was going to take years, and the tenancy agreement had made me doubt whether I'd even win, and there's a point in grief where you will pay almost anything to make the noise stop. £20,000 to stop being told, every week by letter, that the best thing I'd ever built had been a tenancy. I had the settlement letter in front of me and a pen in my hand. Twice. Let me tell you about the specific night I nearly signed, because I think anyone in my position needs to hear how close it gets. It was a Tuesday. Everything in this story happens on a Tuesday, I've noticed. Daniel died on a Tuesday, and I nearly signed my life away on one, and I was sitting on the end of a Premier in bed, with the settlement letter on the little desk and a bureau from the reception in my hand. £20,000. Sign here. And I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking, I'm so tired. I was thinking about how every morning I woke up in that beige room, and for about 4 seconds I forgot. And then I remembered that Daniel was dead, and that his sister had my life in bin bags, and how the only thing that made the 4 seconds of forgetting stop being a mercy was that the remembering got worse each time. And I thought, if I sign this, the letter stop, Bernadette's solicitor stops, the word house guest stops. I can go somewhere and just be sad, which is all I want, which is the only thing in the world I want. I just want to be allowed to be sad about Daniel without also having to prove I knew him. And I got as far as putting the pen on the paper. I want you to understand that. The nib was on the line, and then I thought about a thing Daniel used to say. Whenever I'd want to let something go to keep the peace, a bad invoice, a client who hadn't paid, his sister's little cruelties, Daniel would say, "Don't you dare roll over, Fran. You're the one who fights. It's the best thing about you. Don't let them make you tired enough to stop." And I heard it in the beige room in his actual voice so clearly that I put the pen down, because that was the whole play, wasn't it? Bernadette couldn't beat me on the 20 years. She could only make me too tired to defend them. The tenancy agreement wasn't really evidence. It was exhaustion, dressed as evidence. It existed to make me do the arithmetic that says the truth costs more than it's worth. And it very nearly worked, not because it was true, but because I was grieving and it was 3 a.m. and I was 54 and living out of a car. I didn't sign. I put the letter in the drawer on top of the Gideon Bible, and I lay down and I didn't sleep, and in the morning I rang Ewan and said, "I'm not taking it. Tell me what you need." That was the turn, not courage. Just Daniel's voice, telling me not to let them make me tired enough to stop. What stopped me was two people, and the first was our accountant. Not Daniel's accountant, the one who'd drawn up the tenancy fiction, who was a Riley family friend and had gone very quiet and unhelpful the moment Daniel died. The other one. The bookkeeper who'd done the actual day-to-day books of Riley Joinery for 12 years, a woman called Assumpta Nwachukwu, who I'd hired myself, who had sat 3 feet from me for 12 years while I ran that company. Assumpta rang me. She'd heard, the staff had all heard, the workshop was in uproar, and she said, "Frances, I don't know what they're saying about you, but I've been doing those books for 12 years and I want you to know something. I have everything, every set of accounts. Every payroll run you authorized, every email you sent me. 12 years of you running that company, and I keep everything, and it is all in my files, and if anybody wants to say you were a house guest, I will bring 12 years of documents that have your instructions on every single page." She paused. "And Frances, there's the other thing. The forms, you know about the forms, don't you?" I said, "What forms?" And Assumpta said, "The pension and the insurance, through the company. Daniel took out a director's policy years ago and a pension, and there are nomination forms, beneficiary forms, and I filed them. Frances, have you not seen who he named? I need to explain this, because it's the hinge of the whole thing, and it's the piece Bernadette never thought about. A will is one way to say who gets your things, but it is not the only document that speaks for a dead person. Life insurance policies, pensions, death and service benefits, these very often pass outside the will and outside intestacy entirely, according to a nomination or beneficiary form that the person fills out directly with the provider. It doesn't go through the estate. It doesn't care about intestacy. It goes to whoever's named on the form. And Daniel, who never made a will, who never put me on the deed, who never made me a director, who was hopeless with exactly the kind of paperwork that contemplates his own death, had years earlier. Sitting with Assumpta doing the company's benefits, admin filled out the nomination forms for his pension and his substantial director's death and service policy. And on every one of them, in the box marked beneficiary, he had written, "Frances Aukuffer, my partner, in his own hand. On a form that pays out regardless of the will, regardless of intestacy, regardless of Bernadette, regardless of the tenancy agreement. A form that is, legally, an expression of exactly who Daniel Riley considered his family to be. He'd signed it 4 times over the years, updating it as the policy grew. The last one was dated 18 months before he died. Frances Aukuffer, my partner, 100%. The death and service benefit alone was 4 times his salary. It was substantial. And it was mine, cleanly, outside everything the family was fighting over. And more than the money, it was proof, in Daniel's own handwriting, dated, repeated, that the tenancy agreement was the fiction and I was the truth. Bernadette had built her whole case on the absence of a document. She'd been so certain the missing marriage certificate meant I had no paper that she never once considered that Daniel might have signed something else, something quieter, filed with a pension provider, that said in his own hand what he'd never got round to putting in a will. He'd said it 4 times. Nobody had looked. The second person was Daniel's best friend and business partner in all but name, a man called Vincent, who'd been Daniel's mate for 30 years, best man at weddings, the lot. And Vincent, in the first weeks, had gone quiet. He hadn't sided with Bernadette exactly, but he hadn't stood up either, and it had hurt me badly, because if anyone knew the truth of my life with Daniel, it was Vincent. And about 6 weeks in, Vincent came to the Premier Inn. He found out where I was staying and he turned up in the car park, this big awkward man, and he said, "I've been a coward, Fran, and I'm sorry. Bernadette's my mate's sister, and I didn't want the aggravation, and I told myself it wasn't my business. But it is my business. Daniel talked to me for 20 years. And I know exactly what he wanted and exactly who you were to him, and I've been letting them call you a lodger because I didn't want a row, and Daniel would be ashamed of me. He handed me a phone. I kept his texts, all of them. 20 years. Read the one from about 2 years ago when he was talking about finally sorting the will. And there was a text from Daniel to Vincent 2 years before he died. Need to finally do the bloody will. Everything to Frances, obviously. She is the business, and the house is as much hers as mine. Just need to make it official before I get hit by a bus lol. She'd be looked after anyway. I sorted the pension stuff, but need to make it proper. Everything to Frances, obviously. She is the business. The house is as much hers as mine. I sorted the pension stuff. He knew. He'd meant to. He told his oldest friend 2 years before he died exactly what he wanted. And he confirmed he'd already done the pension forms as a backstop, and then he'd been hit by the metaphorical bus before he made it proper. And the only thing that saved me was that his careless, loving, paperworking hand had years earlier. Filled out 4 beneficiary forms that said my partner. It didn't go to a full trial. These almost never do. But there was a moment, a mediation, a round table, solicitors, Bernadette and Cormac on one side and me on the other, and I want to tell you about it. Bernadette came in confident because she was still holding the tenancy agreement, and she genuinely believed it was a trump card. Her solicitor opened by referencing it. The contemporaneous documentary record, the landlord-tenant relationship, the 11 years of rent, the absence of any marriage or will. Ewan let her finish, and then she laid it out, piece by piece, the way you dismantle something. She put down 12 years of company records, payroll authorizations, contracts, VAT returns, 9 employees worth of management, every page with my instructions on it. This is the house guest running an £800,000 company for 18 years. She put down the house evidence, my payments, the builder's invoices in my name, the 15 years of contribution. This is the Lauder project managing the extension and paying for half the house she was supposedly renting a room in. And then she addressed the tenancy agreement directly, which was the masterstroke, because you don't hide from the bad document, you explain it. She put it next to the accountant's correspondence from 2013 that showed exactly what it was, a lending and tax structuring device. And she said, this agreement was created for a financing purpose on this accountant's advice in this email. The rent is a mortgage contribution from a woman who also paid for half the deposit's worth of renovation. It is not evidence of a landlord and tenant. It is evidence of two people who structured their finances badly because they were unmarried and in love and taking bad administrative advice. My client has 20 years of contribution that says what they were. You have one relabeled document that an accountant designed. And then last, she put down the beneficiary forms, 4 of them, Francis Acafer, my partner, in Daniel's hand dated across the years. And she put down Vincent's text. Everything to Francis, obviously. She is the business. And she said, here's Daniel Riley in his own handwriting 4 times and in his own words to his oldest friend, telling you exactly who Francis was. You have built your case on the theory that because he never made it official, he never meant it. He did make it official. He made it official on every document that let him name a person, and on every one of them he named her, and he told his best friend he'd done it precisely so she'd be looked after. The only thing he failed to do was the will. You are asking this table to believe that the absence of the one document he didn't get to is more truthful than the presence of the 5 he did. Bernadette said, the tenancy agreement is signed. She was a tenant, and I broke my silence once the way I'd promised you and I wouldn't and did anyway. I said, Bernadette, your mother called me Daniel's friend for 11 years. You called me his house guest over bin bags in a hallway I painted. And I have spent 6 weeks in a Premier Inn wondering if you were right. If 20 years was a fantasy, if I made it all up, because everything was in his name, and I had a bit of paper that called me a Lauder. I put the beneficiary form where she could see it. And then I found out that the man you're all fighting over sat down 4 separate times and wrote my name in the box that asks who your family is. Not once, 4 times. He never got round to the will because he thought he had 40 years. But he made sure, quietly, without telling anyone, the way he did everything kind, that if the bus came, I'd be looked after. You didn't know about these because you never knew him. You only found out he had money the week he died. Cormac, the younger brother who'd mostly been silent, looked at the forms and looked at his sister and said, Burn, he wrote my partner 4 times, and something went out of the room then. It settled. Of course it settled. I kept the house, my beneficial interest in it was established, and rather than force a sale, the estate was structured so the house came to me, which is what every scrap of evidence said Daniel wanted. The business came to me too. I'd built it and I ran it, and there was no serious argument once the records were on the table, and Riley Joinery is still going. 9 staff. Daniel's name's still on the door because I will never take it down. Death in service and pension paid out to me directly, outside all of it, because the forms were the forms. Bernadette never had any claim on those at all, which she discovered late and badly. The family got a share of the residual estate. The intestacy did give them something, and I didn't fight that, because I never wanted everything. I wanted what we built, and the law can have its portion of the rest. Bernadette wanted the house and the business and got neither. That was the whole war, and she lost it, over 4 forms filed with a pension company. I did not get 20 years back. I want to be honest about the shape of the win, because it's not clean. I won, and I kept the home and the company, and I also spent the worst year of my grief in a legal fight instead of mourning the man I loved. That's gone. The year I should have spent grieving Daniel, I spent proving I'd known him. Bernadette didn't just try to take the house. She stole my grief and made me spend it on litigation, and no settlement gives that back. Bernadette and I do not speak and never will. She has told the family her version, that I lawyered up and took everything from Daniel's blood family, which requires believing that a company I ran and a house I rebuilt were Daniel's, and that I was a stranger who appeared with a solicitor. Some of the family believe her. I've let them. I spent 20 years trying to be allowed across a line that family drew, and I'm not spending my widowhood, and I use that word, I've earned that word, asking permission anymore. Cormac came to see me months later. He said, I'm sorry. When I saw the forms, I knew. Daniel wasn't careful about anything except the things that mattered, and he made you the beneficiary of everything that led him, and I should have known that without a solicitor telling me. We're not close, but he says my name like I'm a person, which his mother never did in 11 years, and that's something. Vincent runs the workshop side of the business with me now. He never forgave himself for the quiet weeks, and I've told him it's fine, and mostly it is. He kept 20 years of texts from his best mate, and one of them saved my life. He says Daniel would find the whole thing hilarious and horrifying in equal measure, that we fought a year-long legal war that a 30-minute appointment with a solicitor would have prevented. He's right. Daniel would be laughing, and then he'd be furious, and then he'd make us all sit down and eat something. Assumpta still does the books. She said something to me that I've kept. I asked her why she'd filed the beneficiary forms so carefully, years ago, when nobody was thinking about any of it. And she said, because that's the job, Francis. People think the books are about money. The books are about telling the truth about what happened, so that later when everyone's arguing, there's a page that just says what was real. She shrugged. Daniel told the truth on those forms. I just kept them where the truth could be found. That's the whole thing in the end. Daniel told the truth in the quiet documents, the ones nobody performs, the ones you fill out with a board administrator on a Tuesday. My partner, my partner, my partner, my partner. He never made the grand gesture, the wedding, the will, the deed. He just quietly 4 times, on forms his sister never dreamed existed, wrote down who I was. And here's what I tell people now, the unmarried ones, the ones who say, we don't need a piece of paper. The way we used to say it, so happily, so wrongly. You're right. You don't need a piece of paper to love each other. You need it for everything that happens after one of you dies. Because the law does not attend your relationship. It reads your documents. And if you leave no documents, the law will hand your entire shared life to whoever holds the right certificate. And it will not be you, and it will not be love. It will be a birth certificate with the wrong surname in the hand of someone who called you a house guest. Make the will. Put both names on the deed. Fill out the forms. Do it this week. Do it because you love each other, because the paperwork is the love. It's love written in the only language the law can read. We never married. We were together 20 years and we never married, and I don't regret the marriage we didn't have, because what we had was real and complete and I wouldn't trade a day of it. I regret the forms we didn't fill out. All of them except four forms. Filed with a pension company, in a bored man's handwriting on an ordinary Tuesday, years before he needed them. Francis Okafor, my partner. That's what 20 years came down to in the end. Not a marriage certificate, not a will. 4 beneficiary forms that his sister never thought to look for because she didn't know him, because she only ever knew what he was worth. And she found that out the week he died 3 days before she changed the locks on the house I painted. And called me his house guest. I was never his house guest. He wrote it down 4 times. I was his partner, it's on the form.